The pen stopped less than an inch above the signature line. 40 executives stared in complete silence. One signature would erase an entire neighborhood from the map. Then a tiny voice shattered the room. "Daddy, please don't." Every head turned at once. A little girl, no older than 4, stood barefoot on the polished marble floor, clutching a folded crayon drawing against her chest as though it were the most valuable thing she owned. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She was looking only at the billionaire seated at the head of the table. Adrian Sterling's hand began to shake. Nobody in that room had ever seen him lose his composure. The chairman of Sterling Global. The man newspapers called the king of urban redevelopment. The billionaire who never hesitated. But now, he couldn't breathe. The little girl took another step. "You promised you'd find me." A murmur swept through the boardroom. "What is this? Who let her in? Get security." 2 guards rushed toward her. "Stop." Adrian's voice echoed through the room. The guards froze. The child smiled as if she had known he would protect her. She stretched out the folded paper with both tiny hands. "I made this for you." Adrian accepted it slowly. His fingers barely worked. He unfolded the drawing. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. 1 woman. 1 little girl. 1 tall man wearing a blue tie. Above them, written in uneven letters, were the words, "My family." His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Before he could speak, the boardroom doors flew open. A woman rushed inside, completely out of breath. "I'm so sorry," she cried. "Emma." She reached the little girl, dropped to her knees, and pulled her close. "I told you not to run away." Then she looked up. Her eyes met Adrian's. Everything stopped. The color drained from both their faces. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. It had been 6 years. 6 years since Adrian had watched her walk away forever. Or at least, that's what he'd believed. One executive leaned toward another. "You know her?" Adrian barely whispered. "Maya?" She looked as though she had seen a ghost. "I never thought," she breathed. Emma tugged gently on Maya's sleeve. "Mommy, that's him." Maya closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears were already running down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "I know." Silence swallowed the room. Charles Sterling slowly rose from his seat at the far end of the table. His expensive silver watch reflected the afternoon sun. His face remained calm. Too calm. "Security," he said evenly. "Remove them immediately." Emma frowned. "But Grandpa..." The room froze. Charles's expression cracked for the first time in decades. The word echoed through every corner of the boardroom. "Grandpa." Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Adrian looked from Emma, then back again. "What?" His voice failed him. "What did she just call you?" Charles answered without hesitation. "She's confused." Emma shook her head so hard that one of her curls bounced across her forehead. "No." She pointed directly at Charles. "Mommy says he's the mean grandpa." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Someone accidentally knocked over a glass of water. No one noticed. Adrian slowly stood. Every instinct told him something impossible was happening. "Maya." His voice sounded unfamiliar. "Who is she?" Maya looked down at Emma, then back at Adrian. Her lips trembled. Before she could answer, Charles slammed both hands onto the conference table. "Enough." His voice carried the authority that had built one of the richest real estate empires in America. "This meeting is over." No. Adrian had never spoken to his father that way. Not once. The room became painfully still. He didn't take his eyes off Maya. "I asked you a question." Maya swallowed. Tears rolled silently down her face. "Her name is Emma." "I know her name." His voice cracked. "I asked." He couldn't finish. Emma looked up at Adrian with complete innocence. "My name is Emma Brooks." She smiled. "But when Mommy talks to God..." She calls me Emma Sterling. The pen slipped from Adrian's fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp metallic click that sounded louder than an explosion. Nobody moved. Nobody dared. Adrian stared at Maya. You told her? Maya interrupted before he could finish. I never lied to her. Charles stepped forward. This discussion happened somewhere else. No. Adrian's eyes burned with anger. It happens now. He looked around the room. Everyone leaves. One board member hesitated. The contract. I said leave. Within seconds, the room emptied. Lawyers gathered their files. Investors whispered nervously. The vice presidents practically ran for the elevators. Only 4 people remained. Adrian, Maya, Emma, Charles. Outside, reporters noticed executives pouring into the lobby. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Inside, Adrian couldn't stop staring at Emma. She looked at him exactly the way his late wife used to when she knew he was overthinking. The same calm eyes. The same tiny half-smile. It was impossible. Something inside him whispered the truth before anyone spoke it aloud. Emma walked closer. She reached into the pocket of her tiny denim overalls. I almost forgot. She pulled out a small, worn photograph. Its edges were bent. The colors had faded. She held it toward Adrian. My favorite picture. He looked down. His knees almost gave out. It was a photograph taken nearly 7 years earlier. He recognized it instantly. He and Maya stood together on the Seattle waterfront during a summer festival. He remembered that day perfectly because 20 minutes after the picture had been taken, he had asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. There had only been one printed copy. He had kept it inside a leather journal. A journal that had disappeared shortly after they broke up. His voice barely existed. Where did you get this? Emma smiled proudly. It lives under Mommy's pillow. Maya quickly wiped another tear away. I couldn't throw it away. Adrian looked back at Charles. You knew. Charles remained silent. You knew. Still nothing. Adrian's breathing became heavier. Tell me I'm wrong. Charles sighed. This isn't the place. Adrian stepped closer. Tell me. Charles looked directly into his son's eyes. For the first time, there wasn't confidence. Only calculation. Finally he spoke. I did what had to be done. The words landed like a hammer. Adrian blinked. What does that mean? It means your future was bigger than one relationship. Maya gasped. Emma tightened her grip around her mother's hand, suddenly sensing that the adults were no longer simply talking. They were breaking apart. Adrian stared at his father in disbelief. You ended my relationship? Charles said nothing. You kept her away from me? Silence. You knew about Emma? Still silence. Adrian's jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Answer me. Charles finally spoke, his voice colder than ice. I knew the moment she was born. Everything inside Adrian stopped. His daughter. His child. For years. For birthdays. For Christmas mornings. For years of first words. First steps. First scraped knees. First bedtime stories. Gone. Not because fate had taken them. Because someone had stolen them. Emma looked up, confused by the tears now streaming down Adrian's face. She took one tiny step toward him. Then another. Without saying a word, she reached up and wrapped her small arms around his waist. I found you, she whispered. Adrian closed his eyes. He had spent years believing success meant never showing weakness. But standing in that boardroom, holding the daughter he never knew existed, he broke completely. Behind him, the unsigned contract still lay on the conference table. Outside, thousands of families had no idea their futures depended on what Adrian chose to do next. And before anyone could speak again, Daniel Reeves burst through the boardroom doors, his face pale, clutching a thick confidential file. Adrian, he said, struggling to catch his breath. You need to see this. He looked once at Charles. Then back at Adrian. I've just discovered this isn't the only thing your father has been hiding. Daniel Reeves stood frozen in the doorway, gripping the confidential file so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Adrian slowly lifted his head. For the first time in years, Daniel looked afraid. Not nervous. Not concerned. Afraid. What did you find? Adrian asked. Daniel glanced at Charles. That one look told Adrian everything. Whatever was inside that file was something Charles did not want anyone to see. Say it, Adrian ordered. Daniel walked into the room and placed the file on the table. I started checking the old company records after what happened here. He looked at Maya. After I realized the story you were told 6 years ago might not be the truth. Maya's face tightened. What story? Daniel opened the folder. There were dozens of attempts made to contact Adrian after you left. Adrian stared at him. What? Maya looked confused. I sent messages. Her voice became quieter. I called. She looked at Adrian. I wrote letters. Adrian shook his head. I never received anything. Daniel turned the folder around. Inside were printed emails, phone records, delivery confirmations, documents with dates, years of evidence, because someone made sure they never reached him. Maya covered her mouth. No. Daniel nodded. Every email sent to Adrian's private account was redirected. He placed another document down. Every letter mailed to his old apartment was intercepted. Another page. Your phone number was blocked from company records. Adrian stared at the evidence. His entire past was being rewritten in front of him. All those years. All that pain. All those nights wondering why Maya abandoned him. It had never been abandonment. It had been sabotage. He slowly turned toward Charles. Why? Charles remained silent. Adrian's voice rose. Why would you do this? Charles looked away. You were about to become the CEO of Sterling Global. So, you were distracted. Adrian laughed once. But there was no humor in it. Distraction? He pointed toward Emma. Is that what you call my daughter? Charles's expression hardened. I call it a complication. Maya stepped forward. A mixture of anger and heartbreak filled her face. She was never a complication. Charles looked at her. You don't understand the pressure of protecting a legacy. Maya shook her head. No. Her voice trembled. You don't understand what you destroyed. Emma stood quietly beside Adrian, holding onto his hand. She didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. She looked at Charles. Why didn't Grandpa tell Daddy about me? Nobody answered. And that silence hurt more than any explanation could. Adrian looked down at Emma. A child who should have grown up knowing his voice. A child who should have recognized him from more than a photograph. A child who had spent years asking questions he never knew existed. His anger was overwhelming. But then Emma squeezed his hand. Daddy. He looked at her. Yes. Are you mad at me? The question broke him. Adrian immediately knelt down. No. His voice cracked. Never. Emma tilted her head. Then why are you crying? Adrian struggled to answer. Because how could he explain stolen years to a child? How could he tell her that the reason he wasn't there wasn't because he didn't love her? It was because he never knew she existed. He simply pulled her close. I just wish I met you sooner. Emma smiled. You're here now. Those 4 words hurt more than anything. Because she was right. He couldn't recover the years he lost. But he could decide what happened next. And that decision was bigger than his family. Because outside those walls, the city was waiting. The redevelopment deal was still alive. The contract was still sitting on the table. The project that would make Adrian one of the most powerful developers in the country was also the project that would remove thousands of people from their homes. And now he knew something he didn't know before. His own daughter lived there. Daniel opened another section of the file. There is something else. Adrian looked up. What? Daniel hesitated. The apartment complex scheduled for demolition. He looked at Emma. That's where Maya and Emma live. The room went silent. Adrian slowly looked toward Maya. You live there? She nodded. I've lived there for years. Why didn't you tell me? Maya gave a painful smile. Because I thought you knew. Adrian froze. What? She looked down. I thought you chose not to come. The sentence hit harder than anything Charles had said. Maya continued. I spent years believing you built your empire and forgot about us. Her eyes filled with tears. I told Emma that someday maybe she would meet the father who never knew how much she loved him. Adrian looked away. The guilt was almost unbearable. Not because he had abandoned them, but because he had spent years building something while someone else controlled the truth. 5 minutes. That was all Adrian Sterling had. 5 minutes before the people who had spent years controlling his life would decide the future of his company. 5 minutes before a billion-dollar project would either move forward or collapse. Daniel looked at him. The board wants you in that room now. Maya tightened her grip around Emma's hand. Adrian. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Both of them understood what was happening. If Adrian fought against the deal, he could lose everything. His company, his reputation, his entire empire. But if he signed, thousands of families would lose their homes. And his own daughter would be one of them. Adrian looked at Emma. She was quietly coloring on the edge of the table, completely unaware that adults were fighting over the future she deserved to have. What are you drawing? Adrian asked softly. Emma looked up. Our new home. Adrian smiled sadly. You like your home? She nodded proudly. Mommy says our apartment is small, but it has the best window. The best window? Emma nodded. Because I can see the moon from my bed. Adrian looked away. A luxury apartment worth millions couldn't compete with a child loving a simple window. For years, he had believed success meant creating things people admired. Now he realized he had forgotten the most important question. Who are those things for? Daniel checked the time. Adrian. The urgency returned. The boardroom. Adrian stood. But before leaving, he knelt beside Emma. I need you to stay with your mom for a little while. Emma looked worried. Are you leaving again? The question stopped him. 4 words. But they carried 4 years of waiting. Adrian shook his head. No. He gently held her hand. I'm not leaving. Emma studied his face. Promise. Adrian swallowed. Then nodded. I promise. For the first time that day, he wasn't making a promise as a billionaire. He was making one as a father. The boardroom doors opened. Every seat was filled. Investors, executives, lawyers, reporters watched from behind the glass walls. Charles Sterling sat at the center, confident, like he had already won. The chairman of the board stood. Adrian, we need to proceed immediately. Adrian walked to his seat. But he didn't sit. Everyone noticed. Charles leaned forward. Don't make this dramatic. Adrian looked at him. You spent years making decisions for me. The pause. Today, I make one for myself. Whispers spread around the room. The chairman frowned. Mr. Sterling, this is not the time for personal issues. Adrian placed the contract on the table. You're right. He looked around. This isn't personal. He pointed toward the papers. This is about thousands of people whose names never appear in documents like this. The room became uncomfortable. An investor shook his head. Adrian, with respect, this project has been reviewed by dozens of professionals. Professionals who counted buildings. Adrian looked through the glass toward the city. But did anyone count the families? Nobody answered. He continued. Did anyone calculate what happens to a child who loses the only bedroom they've ever known? Silence. Did anyone calculate what happens to an elderly person forced away from the neighborhood where they've spent 30 years? The investors looked away. Because they knew the answer. Nobody had calculated that. Charles stood. This is emotional nonsense. Adrian turned. No. His voice was calm. This is something you never understood. Charles stared. What? Adrian took a breath. People aren't numbers. The room went silent. Then Adrian picked up the contract. Everyone expected a signature. He tore the first page. A shocked gasp moved through the room. Then he tore the second. And the third. The sound of paper ripping filled the silence. The deal was dead. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos exploded. You can't do this. Investors will pull out. The company will lose billions. Your stock will collapse. Adrian placed the torn contract on the table. Then we rebuild. Charles looked at him with disbelief. You would destroy your family's legacy for strangers? Adrian looked back. No. The pause. I would save it. Charles laughed bitterly. You think kindness builds empires? Adrian shook his head. No. He looked toward the door where Maya and Emma were waiting. But it builds something more important. A life. The next morning, the world woke up to a headline nobody expected. Billionaire cancels $12 billion project after discovering his own daughter lived in demolition zone. The story spread everywhere. Some called Adrian a hero. Others called him reckless. Investors panicked. The company lost billions in market value within days. Employees feared layoffs. The board demanded his resignation. But Adrian refused to disappear. For the first time, he stopped hiding behind expensive offices and private meetings. He walked through the neighborhoods his company planned to destroy. Without security. Without cameras. Just himself. He met families. He listened. And every conversation changed him. A father named Michael showed Adrian the height marks on his apartment wall. That's my son's growth chart. He pointed at the pencil lines. Every year, we mark how tall he gets. He looked at Adrian. Where do we put those marks if we lose this place? Adrian had no answer. An elderly woman named Mrs. Carter showed him the garden behind her building. My husband planted those flowers before he passed. She touched one of the plants. I know buildings can be replaced. She looked at him. But memories can't. Those words stayed with him. Because Adrian finally understood. The project wasn't replacing buildings. It was replacing people's lives. 3 months later, Adrian announced something nobody expected. Sterling Global would completely change its approach. The demolition plan was cancelled. Instead, the company would renovate the existing buildings. Residents would remain during construction. Rent would be protected. Community spaces would be created. Local businesses would receive support. And families would have a voice in the future of their neighborhood. The same company that almost erased the community was now rebuilding it. But one person refused to celebrate. Charles Sterling. He disappeared from public view. Until one evening, Adrian found him sitting alone in the old Sterling family office. The same room where Charles had made every decision for decades. You came. Charles didn't look up. Adrian stood by the doorway. I wanted to know why. Charles stayed silent. Why did you take my daughter away from me? For a long time, there was only silence. Then Charles finally spoke. Because I was afraid. Adrian looked surprised. Charles laughed quietly. Everyone thinks power comes from confidence. He looked at his hands. It doesn't. The pause. It comes from fear of losing everything. Adrian said nothing. Charles continued. I watched my father lose control of this company. His voice became softer. I promised myself I would never let that happen again. And you thought destroying my family would protect it? Charles looked down. I thought I was protecting you. Adrian shook his head. No. His voice trembled. You were protecting yourself. Charles closed his eyes. Because he knew it was true. A year later, the neighborhood held a celebration. Not for a new luxury tower. Not for another billion-dollar project. For a community center built in the heart of the renovated neighborhood. Emma stood beside Adrian as the ribbon was cut. She held his hand proudly. You kept your promise. Adrian smiled. Which one? She looked up. You didn't leave. For a moment, Adrian couldn't speak. Because that was the promise that mattered most. Not the contracts. Not the billions. Not the empire. Just staying. Maya watched them from a distance. The man she once thought was gone forever was finally standing exactly where he belonged. Later that evening, Adrian placed Emma's original drawing in his office. The same drawing she brought into the boardroom. The drawing that stopped a billion-dollar deal. The drawing that reminded a billionaire that the greatest things in life could never be measured by money. At the bottom of the picture, beneath the words, "My family," Emma had added something new. A sentence she wrote after learning how powerful love could be. Home is where people choose you. And that was the lesson Adrian Sterling carried for the rest of his life. Because a person can spend years building an empire, but only one moment can reveal whether that empire was worth building. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share what you would have done if you were in Adrian's position. Would you have protected the billions? Or would you have chosen the people who needed you most? And if you believe that family, compassion, and doing the right thing matter more than wealth and power, like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about choices that change lives. Because sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one that saves everyone.